Ever gone down the rabbit hole of, like, really trying to disappear online?
Disappear online.
Yeah, like become anonymous. And we're actually taking it back to 2015 for this deep dive using excerpts from this piece called Tor and the Dark Art of Anonymity.
So we're going back a bit.
Right.
Right.
Which is fascinating in itself to see how much has changed or hasn't. Anyway, this source, it even talks about someone getting grilled in a job interview just because they mentioned Tor. Can you believe that?
It's interesting how just the name Tor can still evoke such strong reactions.
Totally. Like just wanting some privacy online that shouldn't be automatically sketchy.
Absolutely.
So before we get too deep, how does our source define Tor? For those who, haven't built their own anonymous browsing system yet.
Well, at its core, Tor is really about anonymous communication. The simplest way to think about it is this. Usually, your internet traffic is like sending a postcard with your home address plastered right on it. Everyone from the mail carrier to the recipient can see exactly where it came from.
I'm with you.
Tor is like sending that same postcard, but it gets routed through a bunch of different people who each readdress it before it finally gets delivered.
So no more targeted ads based on, let's just say, my unique browsing habits.
Well, we'll get into the limitations later on, but you've hit on a key point. This onion routing, as the source calls it, it masks your IP address.
And for those who don't speak tech, why is that IP masking so crucial for anonymity?
Your IP address is like your digital fingerprint. It can pinpoint your physical location, reveal who your internet provider is, and potentially even connect you to specific online activities. Tor makes it much, much harder to trace those activities back to you.
So it's like a digital disguise, but for your whole online presence.
Exactly.
Clever. But what I find really interesting is our source doesn't just explain what Tor is, it dives into the very real risks involved, too. It's like a digital choose-your-own-adventure, but with some potentially serious consequences if you misstep.
It definitely pays to be cautious.
Our source lays out a bunch of risks with using Tor. It's kind of wild to think some of these issues were already on people's radar back in 2015.
Yeah, things have definitely gotten more complex since then, but some things never change.
For sure. So first up, JavaScript. I know it's everywhere online, but what's the big deal for Tor users?
JavaScript can be a major vulnerability if you're trying to stay anonymous on Tor. Think of it this way. JavaScript is like those little windows on a door, right? They let you see in, maybe get a peek at what's inside. But when you're using Tor and you leave JavaScript enabled on a site, it's like leaving those windows wide open. It can potentially reveal your actual location, what you're doing, all sorts of things you'd rather keep private.
So even if your traffic is bouncing around all over the place, like you were saying earlier, JavaScript can totally blow your cover.
Yeah, it can create a direct line back to you, which obviously defeats the whole purpose of using Tor in the first place.
Yikes. Okay. So how do we board up those windows?
Well, the source recommends a couple of tools. There's NoScript and ScriptSafe. They're browser add-ons that give you way more control over JavaScript. You can choose exactly which sites are allowed to run it.
So instead of those windows being wide open, it's like, what, putting up some curtains?
Yeah, exactly. You decide who gets a peek and who doesn't.
I like it. Okay, next up, exit nodes. Honestly, they always sound kind of shady to me. It's like being the last link in a chain, but you don't actually know what's being passed along.
I can see why you'd say that. The source uses this great analogy. Imagine you volunteer to be a getaway driver.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
So you're behind the wheel. You're the one who looks suspicious to everyone on the outside, even if you have no clue what's in the trunk. Exit nodes are kind of like that. Your traffic, it makes its final hop through the exit node to reach the regular internet. So to any website you visit, it looks like all that traffic is coming directly from YUU, not from all those other nodes along the way.
Ah, I get it. So hypothetically, if someone used Tor to, let's say, download something they shouldn't be downloading and it goes through your exit node, you're the one who looks guilty.
Exactly, which is why the source talks about the legal risks of running an exit node, especially in some countries that have really strict internet laws. You could end up in some hot water even if you had no idea what was being routed through your connection.
Definitely not worth the risk. And then, of course, there's the whole intelligence agency angle. Our source specifically calls out the NSA and their attempts to basically crack Tor. Feels very cloak and dagger, like something out of a spy movie.
It is a bit like that, a constant cat and mouse game between the people trying to stay anonymous and, well, everyone trying to figure out who they are.
Right. And what was that program our source mentioned?
Fox Acid. Sounds intense. Yeah. Fox Acid. It's designed to exploit vulnerabilities in Tor, to try and de-anonymize users.
This is some seriously powerful tech. But our source is clear about one thing. A lot of the time, it's actually user error that trips people up, not just, some super sophisticated government program, right?
We're right. It's often the human element that's the weakest link.
Well, what? Give me an example.
Well, it could be something as simple as carelessly linking your real identity to your Tor activity, reusing passwords you use for other things, or even just, openly talking about using Tor.
Oh, right, like Grady from The Source, the guy who decided to tell his girlfriend all about his extracurricular online activities.
Yeah, not the best move. The point is, even with the most secure tools at your disposal, human behavior can be unpredictable, and one little slip-up is all it takes.
That's a good point, although I do feel a little bad for Grady. But this is all starting to make a lot of sense now. So we've covered some of the biggest risks, but our source doesn't just leave us hanging, right? There are ways to actually mitigate these risks and really amp up your anonymity, right? So it's not enough to just like fire up Tor browser and
Yeah.
call it a day. You got to have the whole setup, the tools, the mindset, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. The source makes it clear you really have to be proactive, really think about how to protect yourself, especially if you're serious about staying anonymous.
Which makes sense given all those risks we just talked about.
Exactly, and remember those risky exit nodes we were discussing earlier?
Yeah, the getaway driver analogy.
Right, so the source talks about using a VPN alongside Tor. It's like adding another layer of obfuscation on top of everything else.
Hold on, so your traffic is already being bounced around by Tor, and then the VPN hides your real location from even the exit node.
Exactly. So even if someone manages to compromise the exit node itself, they still won't be able to see your true IP address or location. It just makes it that much harder to draw a line back to you.
That's seriously sneaky. I love it.
Mhm.
Okay, what else? The source also mentioned something about operating systems, right? Like Tails?
Right Tails. It's designed to be a completely amnesiac operating system. So you can run it off a USB drive and it won't leave any trace of your activity on the computer itself.
So it's like you're carrying your entire anonymous browsing setup around on a keychain.
Pretty much. The source positions it as being like the gold standard for anonymity, especially when you're using public computers or you're concerned about your own device being compromised.
Makes sense. And I can't forget about Hunix. That one always sounds like something out of like a fantasy novel to me.
Unix is interesting. It's a virtual machine, but it's specifically designed to run Tor. So it adds this extra layer of isolation between your Tor traffic and everything else on your computer.
So between the VPNs, the special operating systems, it's like we're building a whole spy kit dedicated to anonymous browsing.
That's a great way to put it. And just like any good spy, you have to think beyond the gadgets. Remember how we were talking about user error being a big risk?
Oh, absolutely.
The source emphasizes this idea of compartmentalization. So using different online identities for different activities, separate email addresses, things like that.
So even if someone manages to uncover one of your online identities, it's not linked to everything else you do.
Exactly. It's about damage control, basically. And the source even gets into using Bitcoin mixers to make it harder to track transactions.
So we're talking like next level stuff here. I'm getting the feeling that really nailing this whole anonymity thing is a lifestyle change, not just, downloading an app and calling it good.
There's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah.
But that's what I find so compelling about this 2015 source. It was already recognizing that shift back then, how crucial user behavior is, the awareness, the constant vigilance.
And that part hasn't changed at all, has it? If anything, it feels even more relevant now than that was back then.
For sure. This source is a great reminder that the tools themselves are just one part of the equation. Protecting your anonymity online really means understanding the tech, knowing where you're vulnerable, and always staying one step ahead.
It's like having the strongest lock in the world, but you leave the key hidden under your doormat.
Exactly. You could have the best defenses in place, but a single moment of carelessness can undo it all. This deep dive into Tor, into anonymity, it's really got me thinking. What about you?
Totally. It's definitely made me rethink my own online habits, that's for sure. For anyone listening, do yourself a favor and check out Tor and the Dark Art of Anonymity. It's a trip. And even if you're not planning to disappear online anytime soon, being aware of these risks, these techniques, it's just good digital hygiene these days. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.